So the Supreme Court has voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. Well, what are the law and what are the facts? I got you. My name is Nate the Lawyer. If you are new here, we talk about the law and the facts. If you're about that life, don't forget to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Now, a draft opinion was leaked from the Supreme Court regarding a case called Mississippi Department of Health, or Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. Now, this is a case regarding abortion. Here is what's going on with the case. Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. Who are the parties? Well, Thomas E. Dobbs, the state health officer of the Mississippi Department of Health, pictured here, versus the Jackson Women's Health Clinic. Now, the Jackson Women's Health Clinic is the last abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi.
They call it the Pink House. In this colorful building sits the Jackson Women's Health Organization, the last operating abortion clinic in Mississippi. Pro-life protesters gather out front regularly to try to convince patients to change their minds.
Now that you know who the parties are, here are the facts.
It's likely to be the most important term for abortion rights in at least 3 decades. The court will take up a Mississippi law that would ban virtually all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy.
After the point where the unborn child can feel pain, we ought to provide them an extra level of protection from the abortion.
But the Supreme Court has consistently ruled, beginning with Roe v. Wade, that states cannot ban abortion before around 24 weeks. Mississippi urges the court to take a bold step and overturn Roe.
If Roe is reversed, probably almost half the states in the United States would strictly limit abortion and perhaps ban it altogether.
So this brings us to the question presented. Now, the question presented is a question that can be answered either yes or no, that the court's going to address, and then explain how the relevant law applies to the key facts in this case. The question presented in this case are whether prohibitions on elective abortions before viability is unconstitutional. Now, the Supreme Court is going to hear oral arguments on this issue on December 1st, 2021. So let's talk about predictions. My prediction for this outcome is unsure, at the least. This case is an attack on Roe versus Wade and its subsequent case, Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Now, these are the court's precedents in the sphere of abortion. Now, the law currently doesn't allow any state to ban elective abortions before the 22nd or 26th week of pregnancy. This time is known as pre-viability. In this case, Mississippi has banned abortions after 15 weeks. So because of Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, this law essentially attacks the holding of those two cases. So this leaves us with 3 possible outcomes. First, they can just overturn the precedent, allowing each state to determine the legality of abortion at the state level. Second, they can uphold the precedent of Roe v. Wade, declaring the Mississippi law to be unconstitutional under current law. Last but not least, they can actually do a little bit of both. They could uphold the 15-week ban by moving the 24-week pre-viability mark back to 15 weeks. How do I think they're going to vote? Well, think about this. You got 3 liberal justices who are definitely going to vote to uphold Roe v. Wade. Then you're going to have a chief justice who I think is going to vote with the liberal justices based on stare decisis. That's the principle that obligates courts to follow its historical rulings, so there's some stability in the law. On the other side, I think Justice Alito and Justice Thomas are strong no's. They've been wanting to overturn Roe for a long time. The 3 wild cards are obviously the Trump judges. Now, I'm assuming that they may want to chip away at Roe by moving the 24-week viability mark to maybe 15 weeks as a first step in chipping away at the precedent. They could also be in the mindset of just overturning Roe and Planned Parenthood altogether and establishing the state's ability to regulate abortions in the manner that they choose. So my final tally for this case, I believe it's going to be a 5-4 decision. I believe the 5 conservative justices will either overturn Roe or make some modification to it, allowing this law to be upheld. But what do you think? Now, as you can see, last year in October when the case hit the docket, I predicted that this case would be overturned because the makeup of the court had changed. And most of the justices who are on the court now have expressed a need to do something about Roe v. Wade because they didn't think it was grounded in proper law. Now, seemingly as predicted, the court has gone with the most extreme version and just overturned the precedent of Roe v. Wade and Casey. Now, let me just give you a couple of facts about this draft opinion. Number one, it was written by Justice Alito, as it says here, but we don't know what other justices have also signed on to the opinion. So the way it generally works in the Supreme Court is that the justices get together and they'll vote on a particular outcome of a case. In this case, the abortion case from Mississippi, it seems like the majority of justices voted to uphold the law. But now the reason and rationale behind it is what has to be flushed out. So one justice is generally given the job of writing the opinion. So there are a couple of drafts that come out, the first, second, third, maybe even fourth or fifth draft, that the other 5 justices who also agree with the outcome can sign on to. Now, if the opinion is drafted in a certain way where all 5 justices sign off on it, then you don't have a problem. It'll be the opinion of the court. Sometimes you'll have a judge say, well, I agree with the outcome, but I don't really agree with some of the rationale. Then that justice will write what's known as a concurring opinion to say, I agree with the outcome, but I have a different reason why I'm coming to that. So that's kind of what you get. But here, the court is trying to flush out its majority opinion, what the court is going to say the law is now in overturning Roe. So directly from which seems to be a legitimate draft opinion, I'm just going to say it, everything rings true that this is a draft opinion that was leaked, likely by a liberal on the court who received this draft document and wanted it to be circulated within to put pressure on the other justices of the court to maybe change their mind about their vote. So in this draft opinion, the court writes, we hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. That provision has been held to guarantee some rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution. These are known as unenumerated rights for those of you who don't know. But any such right must be deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. So that is Justice Alito's rationale for overruling both Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And because this is the first opinion, Justice Alito speaks to the nation and explains why this isn't as bad as a lot of people are going to consider it to be. We do not pretend to know how our political system or society will respond to today's decision overruling Roe and Casey. And even if we could foresee what will happen, we would have no authority to let that knowledge influence our decision. We can only do our job, which is to interpret the law, apply longstanding principles of stare decisis, and decide this case accordingly. We therefore hold that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey must be overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion must be returned to the people and their elected representatives. So what does this ruling mean for you and me? Well, first, if you're in a state where abortion is legal, nothing's going to change for you, because what this did was limit the ability of states who wanted to restrict abortion from doing so. So the states that want to make abortion illegal will now have free rein to do it, and it won't be a violation of a woman's constitutional right for the state to do so. So essentially, each state will be able to decide if they're going to allow abortions or not. And at the federal level, it's really up to the Congress and the federal government to determine if they're going to regulate abortions on the federal level or not. But again, each state will decide whether abortion is going to be legal within that state. The second, I think, effect of this ruling is going to be the political effect. The court has become, I think, 6-3 conservative. But I think this is what the left needed to mobilize. Think about it. Abortion is one of the great calling card issues of the progressive left. Let's just not kid ourselves. This is part of that identity politics that we all kind of rail against. Racism, sexism, transphobia. And abortion kind of wraps right up into that sexism piece of the identity politics. And if you don't really believe it, this is going to be a uniting force. I can see the posters now, restoring Roe, let's change the court. And going into what I believe is a favorable midterm election for Republicans and possibly a favorable presidential election. When you have this type of, I like to call it wedge issue that has really now split, it hit, boom. I think you're going to have a problem if you're on the red side of the aisle, because this has done one of two things. It's mobilized, I think, the Democrats, or will mobilize the Democrats into changing the composition of the court. Either that's through presidential elections or if that's through congressional elections. But that is going to be the mobilizing calling card of the left. For instance, look at Nancy Pelosi, which she just wrote. If the report is accurate, Supreme Court is poised to inflict the greatest restrictions of rights in the past 50 years, not just on women, but all Americans. Great talking point for the Democrats. So now, our last thing I want to speak to is Justice Alito's reasoning for overturning Roe. Essentially saying it was illegal in most of the states, we don't have this long tradition, and the Constitution doesn't really say it, so we can't just make it up and dismissed it as that. But he's trying to make the distinction between rights that are in the Constitution, which we call enumerated rights, and then rights that are not in the Constitution, which we call unenumerated rights. Now, enumerated rights are simple, right? They're in there, we have them, and there's really no question. Rights like the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, the right to a fair trial, those rights are like listed in the Constitution. So there's no argument, right? We have those rights. What we're really talking about is unenumerated rights. And the one constitutional amendment that actually speaks to that is the Ninth Amendment, which says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So this amendment is just simply saying that the listed rights in the Constitution aren't a complete list. And if new rights are discovered, then the Constitution is going to protect those new rights, just like these rights that are listed in there. Now, most people don't realize some of the most fundamental and even more popular rights that we take for granted every day are actually not listed in the Constitution. For instance, the right to privacy. That's not there. And also things like the right to vote, which is actually not listed in the Constitution, where you have an individual right to vote. That's not in there. The presumption of innocence, for instance, that you can't find that in there too. And we're talking about also the right to travel, right to privacy, right to bodily autonomy, and the right to dignity, which are other rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution. We all enjoy as constitutionally protected rights. So now you may say, what's the difference between that right and the right to an abortion? Who knows? It really depends on who's on the court and who's making the decision. So at the end of the day, what do you think? Do you think this forthcoming decision by the Supreme Court is going to be a good thing or a bad thing? Let me know in the comment section. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you next time. Peace.